Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss the Rolling Stones' 1968 album Beggars Banquet. This album, in my opinion, is a turning point for the Rolling Stones. It's kind of them coming into their own sound. And it's the start of a really great run of albums here. You've got this one, and then after this, Let It Bleed. Then you've got Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street, really a golden era for the Rolling Stones and my favorite Rolling Stones albums in a lot of ways. And it begins here. The album comes at the end of the 60s, lots of turmoil in the US, the Vietnam War, stuff like that going on. And this album captures some of that mood and the feeling of what was going on at that time in late 68, 69. The album was released in December of 1968. Interestingly, a month after the Beatles released their White Album. And I always thought this different cover here, the album cover that you see most now is the bathroom toilet cover with the graffiti on the wall. But this album always sort of made me think a little bit of the White Album by the Beatles. And it's understandable why the Stones get compared to the Beatles a lot, because they were contemporaries and peers in a lot of ways. But for me, the Stones are a band that are all about groove and feeling. The Beatles were more of a band with harmonies and nice chord progressions and arrangements. But for me, the Stones are just all about the groove and the feel. And like I mentioned earlier, they really come into their own on this record, and that shines throughout this whole album. So the album was produced by Jimmy Miller, who would do a run of albums with them. And the production on it is great. You would never think that this was 1968. In fact, when I was getting ready for this, in my mind, I was thinking that this album was like 70, 71. So I was surprised that it was this early, and it just sounds fantastic. It sounds like you're there in the room with them. There's a very interesting video where you can see them working on this album, and it's fascinating to see them sort of putting these songs together and the way they worked all this stuff out. And when I was listening to it, I was listening to the vinyl and I had my headphones on. You can hear like the tape machine stopping at the end of the songs, and then the tape machine starting up again before the next song starts. So it has a really live feel, like you are just sitting there in the studio with them. It would also be sort of a turning point for the band in the sense that Brian Jones's drug and alcohol problems were really starting to become a serious issue. And although he plays pretty much on every song on this album, he's starting to it's starting to become a problem at this point. And by the time they get to the next album, Let It Bleed, his contribution would be sort of minimal on that album, and he would land up being fired during the Let It Bleed sessions and die not too long after that. So Keith Richards really carries a lot of the weight here of the guitar stuff that you hear on this album. It also has Nicky Hopkins on piano, and he adds a lot to these songs, whether it's like adding some bluesy elements or just adding another sort of chordal thing there and some rhythm accents and stuff. So the album starts with Sympathy for the Devil, and this is a perfect example for me of what is special about the Rolling Stones and how it's all about the feel and the groove. I mentioned earlier the video of them working on some songs from this album, and one of the songs that you see them building up from the very beginning is this one, Sympathy for the Devil, and it really starts off as just like a slow kind of blues, and eventually you can see it starting to take shape. They add the percussion in this, which to me is like the coolest thing about this song. All the shakers and the congas and everything, and the lyrics in the song are great. And eventually they get the song going, and that bass line there is a great grooving bass line, and those woo woo parts are just awesome, and the lyrics in it are great. I shouted out who killed the Kennedys, but after all it was you and me. The lyrics are just great. And again, they sort of capture the mood of that time. The late 60s was sort of a time of change and turmoil and stuff, and the societal turmoil and stuff. And I think that this song captures it as does other songs on this record. Next is No Expectations. This is a really nice, mellow, laid back song. Mick Jagger. That's what I love about Mick. He can do these more sort of aggressive things like he did in Sympathy for the Devil, but here's just a gentle kind of laid back number. It's got some really nice slide guitar from Brian Jones on it, and just really nice sort of mellow, relaxing sort of acoustic song. Dear Doctor is next, and it's kind of a humorous country blues number. There's a double bass in it that has this super big like low end. When I was listening with my headphones and the vinyl, it just had this such a big warm low end. It was just awesome. I was really digging it. There's really cool harmonies. I always like the Rolling Stones harmonies. Keith over the top of Mick, and they just have a nice the way they sort of blend together, I think, is really cool and kind of a signature Rolling Stones song and sound. And in this one, there's this funny falsetto that Mick Jagger does, like he's a girl reading a letter, and that's just great. I always love, Mick is somebody who's not afraid to just sort of go out there and have fun and play a character. He does that a lot with his voice, where he can sort of do all these different sort of character type voices like an actor or something. Parachute Woman is a cool one. It's a blues, kind of a straight up blues type of thing. It's got sort of a unique sort of vocal line to it. Mick sounds like he's singing through like an old fashioned microphone or something. And then side one ends with Jigsaw Puzzle, which is, again, this is another great Rolling Stones groove thing. It's got an awesome bass line to it. It's got a really cool chord progression and a really awesome feel to it. Charlie Watts I love his drumming. He's a very simple drummer, but he has a great groove and feel to to the way he plays. I remember hearing Malcolm Young from AC/DC when their original drummer Phil Rudd left, and he said, well, we wanted to get Charlie Watts in the band. And at the time I thought, oh, that's crazy. Like AC/DC's this loud hard rock band, Charlie Watts and the AC/DC, that wouldn't make any sense. But as I got older, I started to understand and went, yeah, Charlie Watts makes perfect sense, because he's got a swing and a groove to his playing that it's the same formula with AC/DC. AC/DC cites Rolling Stones as a big influence on them, and I get it, because the Rolling Stones and AC/DC, they both sort of exist on simple chord progressions, but just a great feel, just his swing and groove that they have, and Charlie Watts just does that fantastic. His drums sound great on the record. And all right, so side two starts with Street Fighting Man, which was a big hit for them, a single. You still hear this a lot on the radio. It's got some, again, really sort of current for the times lyrics about protests and people fighting in the streets and stuff like that, which is what was going on, at this time in the late 60s. Prodigal Son is a country blues song written by Robert Wilkins. It's a cool, the Stones have always... the blues is a big influence by them, and I always loved. They always sort of put their own signature on these blues numbers that they tend to cover. So that's a cool one. Then Stray Cat Blues. This is another one with a nasty, heavy groove to it that I just love. I love the drum sound in this one. It sounds like the drums are like really up front, and Charlie's doing like these cool fills, and you can really hear his hi-hat, and I like the chord progression in it, and it's got, again, the piano in here from Nicky Hopkins, just adding to this heavy groove, riff vibe to it. Factory Girl is a cool one. It's got some tablas and congas in it, and there's like a fiddle part in it that gives us like this sort of almost like a Celtic feel. And that's what I always found really cool about the Rolling Stones. When you think of the Stones, you think of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who wrote all the songs on this except for the Prodigal Son, which was a cover. And you think of Charlie Watts and Bill Wyman on bass, and later on Ron Wood and Mick Taylor, and early on Brian Jones. But they always incorporated, especially because kind of starting around this point, they really started incorporating studio musicians, and that really sort of fills out the sound of a lot of these songs, and it really makes it interesting because you have some different instruments going on, like this one with the tabla and sort of the Celtic sounding fiddle, the piano, and the mellotron, keyboard type things that they add here and there. So, and they would do more and more of that, like on the next album, Let It Bleed, for instance. And then the album ends with Salt of the Earth, which I love this song. That the acoustic guitar, Keith sings the first verse, Keith's sort of whiskey soaked cigarette smoking voice, and I love the lyrics in this, just kind of like sing a song for the common man, type of for the hardworking man. It's just great lyrics. Keith sings, and then Mick takes like the next verse, which I love, and I just love the way the song builds, and it gets to the end where there's like kind of like a small choir kind of singing along with them, and it's an awesome song, man. I love the melody and the lyrics and the feel of it, and again, it sort of ties in with this whole them sort of socially conscious lyrics that they're doing on this record, on some of these songs. So, all right, so there you go. Let me know what you guys think of the Rolling Stones' Beggars Banquet. Again, I think it's really bringing the Stones into the 70s, starting a new chapter for them, and a real sort of great run of albums. So let me know what you guys think of this record. Leave a comment down below. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. Lair the Alchemist on Facebook and on Twitch. And until we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.